Alright everyone, welcome back to another video. Last time we left off with the Day of the Confederacy, talking about kind of like the early Confederate wins and some of the early battles with the Confederacy. But we're now on to the turn of the tide. Slavery had caused the war, but the issue on which it was fought was secession. Lincoln wished to emancipate the slaves, but many were held in the Union slave states, and he did not want to lose the support of these states. So he discountenanced General Fremont's attempts to confiscate slaves as contraband of war. Abolitionists angrily jibed, Lincoln would like to have God on his side, but he must have Kentucky. He had to consider the foreign situation also. In general, Europeans cared little one way or the other about secession, but they disliked slavery. If Lincoln could tie the two issues together, he could safely issue an Emancipation Proclamation. William Seward, his Secretary of State, advised him to wait for some military success and issue it with victory. The chance came when McClellan stopped Lee in Maryland at the Battle of Antietam, or Sharpsburg. So Lincoln declared that if the Confederate States were still in rebellion by January 1863, their slaves would be freed. Literally, this did not free a single slave. It did not apply to the Union slave states, and the Confederacy, of course, refused to recognize Lincoln's authority. But it doomed slavery unless the Confederacy won, for it committed the Union government to emancipation. Also, 1863 was the military turn of the tide. Lee invaded Pennsylvania and was met by General George Meade at Gettysburg in a 3-day battle in July. The Confederates were compelled to retreat. Also, 1863. So I just was rereading that again. Vicksburg, the last holdout of the Confederates on the Mississippi River, was taken in the same month by General Ulysses S. Grant, a Mexican War veteran. This led to Grant's eventual command of the chief Union forces. And yet, the war was only half over. For many months, the Confederates stubbornly held out. There were more discouragement in the North in 1864 than among all the defeats of 1862, and Lincoln himself thought that he might not be reelected. The Democrats nominated George McClellan, and many Republicans, how strange it sounds now, demanded a stronger candidate. If General William Tecumseh Sherman had not, in the nick of time, won some striking victories in the South, Lincoln's fears might have been warranted. But he won handily, the South, of course, not voting, and said that the voters evidently thought it best not to swap horses while crossing a stream. Yeah, by this point, the South is pretty handily about to lose. The tide has turned fully. McClellan stopping them at Antietam, big deal. If McClellan had not, things might have gone very, very differently. The South maybe could have at least survived, and that's all they needed to do. They just needed to survive. They didn't need to win, just survive. But it was collapsing, and even if they had won in the East some, if you look at the West, they were losing pretty badly. Grant, Sherman, they were kind of breaking up the West. Vicksburg being taken in the same month as Gettysburg kind of makes it get forgotten some, but it is extremely important. That's the last real stop on the Mississippi River, meaning that the Mississippi is now fully taken. That's a pretty big deal. It now means the entire South has been split in half, and that the Union can get all the way down and around, and there's nothing the South can do about it. And then after that, they talked about Sherman winning some, but Sherman will go on this march through the South where he will break off from his supply lines, in what is referred to as one of the earliest examples of like total war, which is what a lot of war is now. But he breaks off from his supply lines, goes marching through the South, and just lives off the land. Him and his troops live off the land, and they just cause absolute destruction through the South in places that had not seen war, that were just like, oh well, it's not on our fronts, and they didn't really care. But Sherman, marching all the way through, rips up rail lines, rip, takes from farms, takes from all sorts of different things, and it just completely decimates the inner South, which was kind of what was holding on to a big degree here. And for a while, people didn't know what happened to Sherman, because when he broke off from his supply lines, he broke off from communication lines as well. And they didn't really know what happened to him until he shows up on the coast, and yeah, and crazy, crazy what was going on there. But now we'll get into the pictures. So above here is artillery about to go into action on the south bank of the Rappahannock River in Virginia on the 4th of June, 1863. You can see all this artillery. I mean, these cannons, terrifying, terrifying things. We think of them today a lot of times because of movies, where you shoot the cannon and it blows up when it hits the ground or whatever. That's not how cannons work. There were shot that did do that, but it blew up above you, and it was basically a shrapnel explosive, so it would blow up ahead of you, or in front of you, or above you, or whichever, and it would shoot shrapnel down at you, and that was what it was intended to do. But that is not the main shot. That's not really all that common. What is mostly common is solid shot. So solid shot's about a 5-pound ball sometimes, maybe a little heavier, maybe a little less. It just depends. And it's just a ball of lead. Sometimes not just lead, other things as well. And it would be shot out of these cannons, and it's terrifying. There are stories of individuals being, they're standing next to somebody, and then they look over, and that person's head's just gone because it's, a cannon just, you know, and it leaves huge holes in guys and things like that. Horrifying, horrifying. Um, but yeah, there's all sorts of things you can shoot out of cannons, and they are very terrifying, but very effective. On the opposite here is the Plemento Battery in Charleston, South Carolina, 1863. Not very much, huh? Not very much at all. They'd try to put up a fight though, I'm sure. And at the right, a view of the Battle of Gettysburg on the 2nd of July, 1863. That day, General James Longstreet's corps marched the full length of the battlefield in the hope of surprising the Union defense to no avail. At Gettysburg, Lee was hampered by the half-hearted cooperation of Longstreet, who did not believe that Lee should take the offensive in the battle. Partially this is true, yeah, but it's also partially not. There's just a lot of planning that went in, and it just kind of didn't work out very well. Some of Lee's plans didn't work out too well. Some of everybody's plans. Obviously, there's a very famous general, General Longstreet, but there's a bunch of famous charges in this by the South that just don't work out very well, and a lot of the people in charge get blamed for them, but it wasn't really their fault. They were ordered by people above them. So this picture here, General William T. Sherman's advance towards Atlanta was temporarily halted at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, where the Army of Tennessee was firmly entrenched. And you can see Union troops there, and you can see this very entrenched. And yes, the South would hold this for a little bit, but Sherman will get around them, get through them basically, and this defensive position won't really matter in the long run. Yeah, Sherman marches to Atlanta, which today is a very important city, but back then it wasn't as much. It was a rail hub. Really, it just happened to be where a lot of railways met. Um, so that's why Sherman was heading that direction. He was going to rip it up and really disrupt a lot of railway things. But in terms of like a population and stuff like that, Atlanta was just not a very big city back then. It was very, very small. But above, 4 Union generals who were present at Gettysburg. Seated is General Winfield Scott Hancock. Standing to the left, standing left to right, I should say, are Major General David Birney, Brigadier General Francis Barlow, and Brigadier General John Gibbon. That's a pretty important person. So this is not uh, Winfield Scott. This is Winfield Scott Hancock, a different person. Winfield Scott was, I believe, still alive at this point, but he's actually still in charge of the entire Union forces. Winfield Scott is in charge for a long time. People kind of forget about that just because it's one of those, like, he didn't necessarily go out in the battle or anything like that, but he was still in charge. Um, he really deserved it. I mean, like, I'm gonna be honest, he really deserved that spot. Winfield Scott, really great general that kind of gets forgotten about in American history. Really unfortunate for him, but really cool, collected guy. Knew what to do a lot of times, but at this point he's just very old, so not as great as he once used to be, but he's still pretty good. But, yeah, these guys are very present, and they do decent work at Gettysburg. At the far left here is General William Tecumseh Sherman in 1865. Now, Sherman, very obviously well known. His march to the sea, march to Atlanta, and he's basically Grant's right-hand man. There's Grant, we'll get to that in a minute. But he's basically Grant's right-hand man, and Sherman in his own right is a very good general. He's a little bit more harsh than some people, but sometimes you need that. And he got the job done. That's what really matters at the end of the day. He got the job done. At the left here is General Ulysses Simpson Grant, the military hero of the Union forces. Yeah, Grant, very, very good general. Probably the best in the entire war. I know Lee gets a lot of credit, but Grant is in many ways better. He outmaneuvers Lee many a time because Grant is one of those, he can think on his feet more so. Lee, he's a good tactician, a good strategist, but one problem that Lee has is adapting more so than he should. Adapting like he should, I should say, not more so than he should, but adapting like he should. There are many examples of when he's trying to do things, it just doesn't work out. Or like Gettysburg, for instance, is a good example. Things were not going good even from the beginning, and Lee just stuck to the plan rather than going, okay, this situation has changed, let's try to change with it. Kind of does him in somewhat. At the top here is a rare photo of Vicksburg, Mississippi, taken in 1863 during the siege. Now, Vicksburg was one of the most serious obstacles to Northern control of the Mississippi River and was defended by General J.C. Pemberton. The siege lasted from the 17th of May to the 4th of July, when Pemberton surrendered to Grant. Yeah, Pemberton does his best to hold out against Grant, but it really, there was nothing he could have done. He was basically surrounded on all sides, more or less, and Grant is willing to hold out on this siege. And here's the thing I think is very interesting. 17th of May to the 4th of July. One thing that people kind of tend to forget is sieges take a long time. You always see movies and stuff like that where sieges go really quick, but sieges take a long time. Now, this isn't like a siege at the medieval times where it could take even longer, but still, like this siege, I mean, Pemberton did the best he could, but he just wasn't gonna hold out forever. But the fact that he held on as long as he did, I mean, that's an accomplishment in itself, right? And then below is the Union losses at Gettysburg were about 23,000 compared to the Confederate death toll of approximately 30,000. Yeah, Gettysburg, the bloodiest battle of the war. Not the largest, but the bloodiest. We actually talked about that in the other video, but yeah, it's a very, very bloody battle. And one of the in the general of the Union actually that was in charge, Meade, General Meade. Once again, one of those people that gets forgotten about. Meade was a great general, and him and Lee were probably about similar, um, like battle acumen, you could say, like strategic acumen. Um, and Meade gets kind of lucky too in some regard. He gets Lee's entire plan. Um, there's a guy that was carrying the plans, and he had them around cigar wrappings, and Meade gets a hold of those, and he's able to counter him. But Lee and Meade, they went to the same, they learned the same stuff, things like that. They both understood these tactics very well. And could another general have stopped Lee at Gettysburg? Of course, but um, Meade is probably one of the only people that could have stopped him the way he did, without the Union having even more losses than they already did. Meade is a very, very good general and kind of gets forgotten about. Um, and it's kind of during the time, because of how bad Gettysburg went in terms of casualties. Uh, that's kind of why he got pushed out. But Meade is a very, very good general, and he'll be in charge still for a while. Actually, technically, when Grant takes over, Meade is still above him during that whole time. Lincoln understood Meade was very good, and he kept him in charge. It's just Lee gets kind of bumped up. No, not Lee. Meade gets bumped up to more of like a commanding of all forces kind of thing, whereas Grant is in charge of uh, the armies in the east. But yeah, yeah. But Meade, very, very good guy. Sad he gets forgotten about so much. Old snapping turtle there. That's what they used to call him. But that's gonna do it for this video. If you guys liked the video, leave a like. If you have any ways I can improve these videos, leave a comment down below. I'd appreciate your feedback. And as always, subscribe. It really does help out the channel. Thank you.